While You Were Sleeping. Written by Just Soph. Read by Rashi. Jean Gunhilder gets her first look at the new bookstore in town on her way to the office, the bright sign above the door reading, "The Sumeru Rose," catching her eye. She stops in front of the window and peers into the empty store, the interior of the store clearly being renovated. As the name suggests, shades of purple line the walls. Boxes of books in the process of being unpacked are dotted around the space, lying next to what looks like empty shelves and displays. A slip of paper in the window states the store will be coming soon, the opening date listed as being several weeks in the future. Jean remembers the building had been empty for several years up until now. She smiles at the thought of something new, finally removing the sad mark on the street she walks down so frequently, and a bookstore at that. Jean had always held a hidden penchant for books, especially romance novels, though sometimes it was difficult to find romance suited to her tastes. Growing up, the number of lesbian romances she could find was quite limited, and good lesbian romances were even scarcer. She hopes this new store will have a good selection. There have been several titles she read about online that she had held off on ordering. If Jean could buy a book and support a local business at the same time, she would be all for it. She pictures herself spending hours inside the store, curled up in some corner with a cup of coffee or tea and a book, temporarily at peace with the world. How peaceful would that be? She tears herself away from the window to resume her commute and tries not to think about what those few minutes' delay would mean for her work calendar. A small sigh escapes her as she moves on with her day. Yes, a day in the bookstore would be quite lovely. Maybe she can make time in a few weeks. Every day she walks past the store, she finds herself longing for that imagined day. She sees bits and pieces start to pop up of added personality to the storefront, the closer to the store's opening. Designs are added to their window, flower pots placed outside, and the exterior is repainted. The bookstore is becoming everything she hopes for, and Jean can't help but get her hopes up. Jean never sees anyone inside the store all the while, her work hours well outside of the norm. The kind of person who would open a bookstore in this economy must be passionate, Jean decides. They must also enjoy sharing ideas and stories with the world, creating a space for a community to congregate around a shared love. She certainly admires the drive that must be necessary to pursue such an endeavor. Jean thinks she might have a fair bit in common with the owner. After all, she did not get into politics for profit, though she couldn't say the same for many of the others in her field. She wants to create change and good for the people of the city she loves so much. One day, she would move past managing Varka's political office, and she could have the ability to create real change. She endures the long hours, the rejected proposals, and the declined edits. This will be worth it, she always tells herself. It has to be. The opening of the store comes, and Jean walks by as usual that morning, though not before taking another peek through the window. She smiles at the completed interior, the boxes long gone from the floor, colorful displays of books arranged on polished shelves and tables. There seems to be plenty of seating available from what she can see, with armchairs and couches tucked into the corners. She wonders if there's a cafe area somewhere inside as well. Jean can't seem to find the time to spend a full day in the store. Every weekend, something comes up at the last minute to ruin her plans, and Jean finds herself well and truly exhausted by her boss Varka's negligence. Several weeks pass after the bookstore's opening, before Jean leaves work at an early enough time for the store to still be open on her way home. The sun was setting, but it was not yet completely dark. The lit interior cast soft beams of light through the window onto the sidewalk. Jean stops outside once again, considering her options. She doesn't have anything ready for dinner yet, so she can't spend too long if she goes in. Jean bites her lip and decides she's been delayed enough. Jean pushes her way through the front door, triggering a quiet jingle. A few others mill around the bookstore, some of the cushiony seats still available, some occupied. Jean thinks that's probably good for a weekday, an hour or so before closing. She finds there seems to be a currently unmanned cafe area, much to her satisfaction. She strolls idly around the shelves, taking in the colorful spines and covers. The sections are clearly labeled by genre. A few tables have special displays showing off staff and seasonal selections. Jean makes her way to the romance shelf, trying to cast aside her embarrassment, reminding herself it was perfectly normal for people of all backgrounds to enjoy such things. She has limited time today, after all. There was no sense in pretending she didn't have a preference today. She finds the romance shelves quickly after. Jean spends a few seconds reading the titles and covers, wondering if she should have looked for recommendations beforehand. She's about to pull out her phone when she sees a sign reading LGBTQ Romance above the next shelf. Jean smiles, pleasantly surprised. She sees several titles she recognizes, and several that look interesting, that she's never heard of. She reads the summaries and first few pages of several books, trying to pick one or two to bring home today. Out of the corner of her eye, she spies a few copies of Vera's Melancholy. The novel was one of her favorites, if not her favorite, and had gotten her through some difficult times. As one of the few lesbian romances she could find when she was younger, it held a special place in her heart. The edition seems newer than her old worn copy waiting at home. Her interest is piqued, wondering what a modern cover would look like for her favorite novel, and reaches out for one of them. Someone else reaches out for the same copy, their hands brushing briefly, before Jean quickly pulls her arm back. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't see you there." Jean apologizes immediately, before looking up to meet the eyes of the person standing next to her. I... Jean blinks several times. The woman is, objectively, one of the prettiest women she's ever seen in her life. Her long brown hair flows in a side ponytail, her eyes a gorgeous shade of green, and her small smile lights up her complexion. She wears a striking purple dress that Jean thinks, in her professional opinion, as a woman who just so happened to like other women coincidentally, and most people in general would probably also agree, was quite flattering. Jean flushes red and finds the word she was about to say missing from her mind, averting her eyes. "Oh, nothing to worry about, dear." The woman reassures Jean. "I understand how easy it is to get lost reading, and shut everything else out, of course. That goes without saying." "Ah, of course." Jean concurs, dismissing the odd wording. The conclusion is reasonable. They are in a bookstore, after all. "Still, I'm sorry about that. Have you read it before?" "I'm afraid I haven't had the chance yet. It's been on my list for some time now. Have you?" "It's one of my favorites," Jean confesses. "I was curious if there were any additions to the newer editions. My copy at home is rather old at this point." "I see," the woman hums, stepping forward. "If it comes at your recommendation, perhaps I can push it up my list then, What do you say, Miss...
Jean."
Jean? Does Vera's Melancholy have your endorsement?"
Yes, it does."
Jean can't help the smile creeping at the edges of her mouth. How ridiculous.
"Would you mind if I bought it for you? I am endorsing it, after all."
The woman doesn't respond immediately, and Jean thinks she misstepped somehow. She shuffles her feet, the uncertainty growing. "That's hardly necessary. But if you insist, I won't say no. You're too kind, Jean." The woman smiles.
"What a relief. I would love to hear your thoughts on it afterward," Jean adds. "I haven't spoken to anyone about it before. Admittedly, I'm curious if it holds up for someone reading it for the first time in current times."
"That can be arranged."
"Wonderful."
Jean smiles back. She passively checks her watch and startles at the time displaying on it,
Oh, it's nearly closing, isn't it? We should check out. So it is, the woman agrees. Jean gathers the book she picked out, and the book for the woman, whose name she realizes she doesn't have yet. Sorry, I just realized I didn't get your name. It's Lisa, she chuckles. I thought that might be the case. Shall we? I'd hate to keep poor Razor waiting. It is a school night. Lisa gestures towards the checkout. Right. Jean nods. She assumes that must be the employee at the counter. They arrived at the checkout, and Jean carefully sets her small stack of books on the counter. The cashier, Razor, shoots an odd look at Lisa before making eye contact with Jean. Jean isn't sure what that was about, but they did seem to be familiar with each other, so it was probably best not to read into it too much. Did you find everything? Razor asks, scanning the books one by one. Yes, you all have a wonderful selection. I had not yet had the chance to stop by since you opened. We're glad you stopped by, Razor says. Is the cafe operational? It seemed closed when I came in. Razor pauses, glancing again at Lisa. Not yet. Do you know when it will open? Razor glances at Lisa once again. How odd, Jean thinks. But maybe the boy is just nervous speaking with new people. I don't. The owner would know more. I see. That's okay. I don't want to be a bother. I'll have to wait and see the next time I'm here. Jean pulls out her card and pays, taking the bag of books off the counter from where Razor left them. She takes the top book out of the bag, pressing it into Lisa's hands. As promised, for you. You really didn't need to. But, I suppose, how am I supposed to say no to such a kind offer from someone as endearing as yourself? Jean blushes at the praise. Flattery is unnecessary. It's enough for me that you will get to experience one of the best romance novels for the first time. How chivalrous, Lisa remarks. I'll let you know what I think when I finish. I would love to talk to you about it sometime. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. The realization occurs to her that she doesn't have Lisa's number. Oh, but... Jean trails off, not wanting to be too forward. Sounds wonderful, Lisa cuts in. You'll stop by here sometime again, yes? Jean nods. I'm sure we'll run into each other then. Lisa must be a frequent customer for her to be certain she would be here when Jean came. I'll, see you around then. Bye, Jean. See you soon. Lisa's eyes shine in the glow of the lights, contrasting with the darkness of the window pane behind her. Bye, Lisa, Jean replies, averting her gaze. Jean pushes her way out of the store, and the cold night greets her. She takes a deep breath and turns in the direction of her home. She feels satisfaction well up inside at accomplishing her goal. Surely this had filled her social quota for the month. Jean frowns at the thought. Waiting another month before seeing Lisa again seems especially unappealing. Lisa seemed so sure she and Jean would meet again. Jean wasn't lying when she said she would return to the bookstore. But what were the odds that Lisa would be there when she did? Jean should have asked her for her number, she concludes, cursing herself for not taking the initiative. She glances behind herself, half hoping to see Lisa standing in front of the store, but the sidewalk was empty. Come to think of it, Jean is unsure if Lisa ever left the store. The logical conclusion is that she simply missed her exit. But she hasn't walked that far. Jean eventually shrugs it off. Maybe Lisa wanted to grab a few things on her own. Jean mentally runs through her calendar for the next few weeks. If she shuffles a few things around, she thinks she can clear a full day to visit the bookstore. If she's being completely honest with herself, a large motivation is that the sooner Jean returns to the bookstore, the more chances she has to run into Lisa again. At the same time, she hopes it isn't too soon. Jean wants Lisa to have ample time to finish Vera's Melancholy after all. She really is interested in hearing what Lisa thinks, and finally having someone to talk with about her favorite novel.
She hopes that this isn't too selfish of her. Jean gets the impression that Lisa is the type of person with valuable insight and perspectives she would love to hear that she hasn't considered before. She has a feeling Lisa's field of knowledge might be larger than most would think. Yes, Jean can't wait to hear what Lisa thinks about the book, but Jean thinks she wants to hear her opinions on everything. The days on Jean's calendar are marked off one by one. The day Jean had managed to clear fast approaching. The day soon arrived, and Jean awoke at her usual hour, far too early for a bookstore to be open, or really anywhere that didn't specialize in selling coffee. Deciding to make the most of her morning, Jean left home early, finding it difficult to break her routine. The restaurant she frequents the most opens early, a local diner that kept traditionally odd hours to accommodate both late and early customers. Jean often found herself there late at night, when nothing else was open. This would be her first time in a long time eating there in the morning. The Good Hunter is fantastic as always, and Jean is struck by how different things look in the daylight. Decorations on the walls catch her eye that do not pop the same at night. The staff at this hour are unfamiliar to her, if not just as friendly. Jean's mind is mostly free from work, her thoughts fixating on whether or not she would see Lisa today. To talk about the book, of course, and for no other reason whatsoever. Jean idly checks the time and sees that the bookstore has been open for an hour by now. She didn't exactly want to go at opening hour, thinking that it would be strange to most people. An hour's wait is sufficient, she thinks. She shortly after leaves the diner, heading down familiar streets. The city, too, is different during the day. She spends so much time in her office that the level of activity outside is foreign to her. She passes a park, normally closed in the evenings and barren in the early morning. Now, the park is well populated, and the sounds of people enjoying the nice weather ring out clear. She blinks and feels the weariness that had built up over time slowly retreat. A pleasant breeze brushes by, fluttering her hair. The sunlight presses warmth into her skin. She pauses on the sidewalk, taking the atmosphere in. Right, she thinks. This is the city she loves. When Jean enters the Sumeru Rose for the second time, the bookstore is buzzing. The customers inside are energetic, in a way that the more reserved evening crowd is not. Jean perked up, seeing the cafe section of the store open for business. The setup seems standard, with a small display for baked goods, accompanied by the various appliances needed for the range of offered caffeinated beverages. Jean's eyes dart around the display, before resting on the woman behind the counter, her eyebrows raising upon realizing who it is. Lisa smiles back at her from behind the counter, waving her fingers. "Welcome back, Jean." "Ah, I didn't expect to see you behind the counter," Jean says sheepishly, approaching Lisa. "Yes, that much was clear after last time." "So, you work here then?" "Oh, dear." Lisa stares incredulously back at her. "Not quite." Some pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place for Jean. Oh, you're the... My apologies. I didn't mean any offense. I sincerely apologize for my misunderstanding." Jean fumbles. Lisa laughs softly. "Jean, there is no need for that. It's quite all right, darling. How about this? I'll make whatever drink you would like, and we can sit down and talk about the book afterwards. I prefer to make a habit of keeping my promises." Jean nods her assent, smiling. That would be lovely. The pair of them didn't know it yet, but years later they would look back on that day fondly, as the day their story truly began. Not a day goes by without Jean thinking of the sun in Lisa's hair, or the sound of her voice driving the motifs and metaphors of the novel she loves so much. Not a day goes by without Lisa thinking about Jean truly listening to and engaging with what she had to say, or the soft expression on her face that first pulled her in. Love painted colors over the windows of their souls the moment they met. Did you seriously let her buy a book from you? From your own bookstore?
Kaya, a handsome woman wanted to buy me a lesbian romance novel. Am I supposed to say no?
Kaya runs a hand through his hair. He supposes he can't argue with that.